so we're going to record Grandma talking about this cup. Okay, so hold it up. We're going to play this for Nell or whoever. So you think it belonged to Albert Davie?
Yes, I think it does. I think it belonged to Albert Davie, and that he carried it during the Civil War, or what they called the war between the states. The Southerners still call it that. And after the war was over, all of the when they settled Dakota Territory, and they wanted people to move into Dakota Territory, they offered every veteran 40 acres that he could live on, and if he stayed on it for 5 years, it became his by law. And then he could also apply for another additional 40 acres next to his home, which they called a tree claim. And if the tree, and I don't think they had to plant trees on the whole 40 acres, but they probably had to plant trees around the perimeter of the 40 acres. And and they had to keep those trees alive for 5 years, and if the tree claim, if they were able to prove up, they called it, prove up on their claim, then they could have that additional 40 acres for their own in order to settle Dakota Territory.
And how did they figure out who got which land?
There was something that they called, it was like almost like a sweepstakes, because I remember when they settled Oklahoma, they had what they called the run for the border, and everybody had to line up just outside the borderline of what would be Oklahoma. And then when it was noon or whatever it was, they had to start running toward, and each of them trying to get ahead of the others to get a unsettled piece that hadn't been claimed by somebody else.
So did they have to run to where they wanted the land, or was it like a foot race and whoever won got to pick first?
No, they were on their buggies and horses and everything else.
I see. Okay.
And that's why they called it the Oklahoma Run.
Mm-hmm. So they actually went to whatever land they wanted.
Yes, they had to find it. They had to get there before somebody else. When you got to a claim, you planted a stick or something, and that was your claim for that piece of property.
So had the feds or somebody already gone out and divvied it up into plots of some kind?
Apparently.
So it was surveyed previously?
Yes.
I see. So they must have had time to go ahead of time and kind of look and figure out what they wanted.
Yeah, they did. But if the people right across that got across the border first might have got the choicest claim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in order for them to get any at all, because there were more people that wanted it in Oklahoma than there were in the Dakota Territory.
Right.
Dakota Territory, they wanted to settle it. But Oklahoma was, I think, already a state.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an entirely different matter there.
Did they displace the Indian tribal people who were there in order to divvy up the land?
I think they must have.
Is that part of what they called the Trail of Tears?
Well, most of that Trail of Tears, yes, I think it was part of the Trail of Tears. But most of the Trail of Tears Indians came from further east, like Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And
So were they displaced to Oklahoma?
At one time, they were displaced to Oklahoma, and then they were displaced to reservations
Mm-hmm.
at the so that the white people could have the land.
Mm-hmm. Like up here.
Like up here, when the Black Hills was there, the government treaty was to give the Indians the Black Hills.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. government broke all its treaties with the Indians.
And they lost the Pahasaba because of the gold.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so both of your grandfathers came to Dakota Territory and got land as a result of that?
Yeah, yes.
Now, was Albert Davie's land in Iowa and the Buswell land in Dakota?
I think that it was the other way around. I think the Buswell land started in someplace in Iowa.
Independence, Iowa, like
Yeah,
it says
I
on
think
that
so. Yeah,
on
I
that
think so. Yeah.
Isn't it a marriage license that's from Independence,
Yeah,
Iowa?
Yeah.
So that's where the Buswell,
Yeah.
that was James Murdoch Buswell,
Yes, yes.
who ended up there,
Yeah.
and Albert Davie came to Dakota.
Yeah.
Was he more down by Yankton somewhere and then came north? Or did the Davie land, was that always the land that became Sioux Falls eventually?
I think it's the land that became Sioux Falls eventually, because at that time, my Uncle Charlie,
Charlie Davie?
yeah, lived, I think, in what became Harrisburg.
And he was Albert Davie's brother?
No, he was his son.
Oh, I missed a generation.
That was
Your
one of-
Uncle
one-
Charlie.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, sure, because that was,
One of my father's brothers.
yeah, because Albert Davie was your grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my dad had quite a lot of brothers. His brother Albert, he was considered a hunchback because he had fallen out of a wagon or something and hurt his spine. And in those days, they didn't know anything about spines, and so he was always bent over.
So this would have been Albert Jr.,
Yes.
because Albert Davie was your grandfather, but then there was also an Albert Davie that was your father's brother.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And then my father's also had the brother George that had his jaw broken when they tried to pull a tooth.
Mm-hmm. And he was the one who died young from an infection.
Yes.
And then there was a Fred.
Yes, Fred. Uncle Fred was the one that he had an awful lot of kids. But he was the one that was going with his sons to hunt elk when he was 95 out in the mountains.
Well, you being 95, I'm glad I'm not taking you hunting for elk. I'm glad I'm not going hunting for elk. Yep. And I'm going to kind of zoom in on this cup a little bit so we can look at it better in the picture. Let me turn it a little more and then there's more light on it. And we've been trying to figure out the origin of this. I'm going to turn it a little bit in your hands so we can see it's kind of engraved, but it might be stamped in some way, the pattern on there. Because it kind of makes, it looks a little bit like what you do with Western leather tooling.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would have little stamps that were, you know, and pound on them with a mallet. Yeah. And you think it's pewter.
Yeah.
And you think that Albert Davie had this and he carried it with him in the Civil War. They used it to scoop water out of streams or whatever whenever they found water.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I've been there's no maker's mark on it, but we think it probably would have come with him from the Providence, Rhode Island area.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the Iowa militia or whatever. I've got the number of the organization that he was part of, the division or battalion or whatever it was. I've got that as something at home. But I don't understand how somebody who came from the East Coast ended up in part of what would have been called the Iowa militia. Did people come from the East to the West and then join up with companies? Or were there some kind of representatives who went and solicited draftees or volunteers? Or how did that all work? Do you know anything about that?
I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe there just weren't enough people like in Providence, Rhode Island, to form a company or division or something. So they were assigned to fill out like a squadron or whatever it would be.
And I suppose since the death toll in the Civil War was so very high because of, you know, infection and dysentery and all of that, they may have had vacancies that needed filling.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
You know, that had, irrespective of where you came from.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't too long ago that Neil and Mary were here for a little visit. Then, and you told me that Neil has the musket.
Yes.
That belonged to the same person, Albert Davie.
Yes. Yes.
Albert Davie's musket. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that he got to have that, and that he was telling us that his son is become a real history buff and is doing some Davie family history. So I'm hoping when he finishes that up, we'll get a copy of that and we can look at that some more. Okay. Do you know anything else about this that you want to tell us?
I can't think of anything more, except that it's been in the family for forever, it seems like.
Uh-huh.
And I suppose Dorothy had it at first.
I kind of think so.
And then it came over here. It could have been in the same trunk with that Bible that we think Thorgal threw away because
of the water?
Because of the water.
Yeah, there was a large trunk that was covered in kind of tooled leather, as I recall, that was in Dorothy's garage.
Yes.
And one summer after there were some really bad storms, there was a lot of water that got in.
Yeah.
Like under the garage door, and more than, not through the windows, because Thorgal had fixed those already.
Yeah.
But soaking up from underneath.
Yeah.
And it was really crumbly and awful, the stuff in there, and a lot of that was thrown out because it was just turned to muddy mush. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hold it up one more time, just a little closer to the camera, and then I'm going to end our recording for now.